Folks, if it's not in this book, you must stand up against it. No clapping, please.
Everything that you need to know to be saved is clearly stated in the Bible. Everything you need to know to follow the will of God is clearly stated in this book.
Oh God, I want those that are saved to stop looking around them at a cultural Christianity that you hate and will spew out of your mouth, and that they will look at the Word of God and say, I will follow Jesus.
You take one step off of sola scriptura and you have put your foot on a theological banana peel. You are on a slippery slope. It is inevitable. You are headed down, down, down until you crash at the bottom.
The false peace has been given to them that they can live in their sins. If those 100,000 people have not been given the full gospel of Jesus Christ, has not been preached fully, if the claims of the cross have not been laid there, and if they've been coddled and comforted in their sins, that 100,000 have been made twice a child of hell.
For you, beloved, my question for you, little child, you could be my children. And I pray someday when my little boy grows that there'll be a preacher who'll stand before him and say, enough of this! Let's get down! What does the Word of God say? How does your life stand in front of that blazing fire which is the holiness of God? On that final day, beloved, precious little girl, beloved, precious young man, on that final day, will your confession hold true?
We're not just dogmatic about it, we're bulldogmatic about it.
Well, I've got a lot to edit out. My sound was not plugged in. I used a mic cord to plug in my sound. That was embarrassing. Normally, normally it's just muted, and that's why I don't have sound. Oh, so I'm gonna have to explain that all over again. Oh no. James Lindsay was on Tim Pool's show. Tim Pool is a news guy that I like to listen to instead of your mainstream news. I like him a little bit better than Ben Shapiro. Sometimes on his show, there's some profanity. That's why the warning's at the bottom. I don't think there is any in this segment, but hey, there could be, just so that you know. But they're going to talk about the double standards that CRT and Marxism creates. What am I talking about there? Well, in 2020 and beyond, if you know what I'm talking about, you can have an anti-racist group, kind of the heroes, burn down half your city, and they get the applause of the culture of the media. They're the heroes. Meanwhile, you'll have truckers, you'll have others who they're blocking traffic, they're blocking, trucking routes and all that, to end mandates and everything. Well, they're actually your terrorists. They're treated an entirely different kind of way. And so he's going to talk about that and what's going on in the public schools. James Lindsay is the guy sitting down with Tim Pool here. He is an authority on CRT. And Vodi Balcom quoted James Lindsay in his book and used James Lindsay as a resource. James Lindsay sat down with a lot of Christians and talked about CRT because he has a lot of concerns about it. So with that, we're just going to jump in and go from there because there's so much happening surrounded, with CRT right now. The SBC president, well, that's going to be a battle largely over CRT and people wanting, if I heard right, Vodi Balcom to be nominated for the SBC president. Well, would that ever happen? I highly, highly doubt it. But folks, it seems like are rallying around in the SBC, their CRT president, if you want to call him that. But it's getting interesting. And comments that Phil Vischer made. But let's get into the video from here.
So for me, I'm in a chat room looking at video games, and I'm like, how do I make it so when the guy moves, the world moves around him? Like, what? But like, someone told me, set the create a zone, set it so that when your player object reaches the zone, the program sets his coordinates to be 1 degree, to the left or whatever, like y-1 of the coordinate. And so he'll always stay in the middle of the screen, and then have it set that when object reaches the zone, then you have other objects. And I'm like, wait, what? And so I'm learning from actual adults who are interested and explaining to me how these things work, telling me like what parallax scrolling was. So I started making my own video games.
Yeah.
Now on the internet, your kid's going to go on there and it's going to be a bunch of psychopaths and emotionally stunted losers who are like trying to manipulate their brains.
Straight up grooming.
Right.
Like they'll just
That's
cut
also
to
true.
it. And then they go to school and they get groomed again by the Maoist freaking education program.
Yeah.
The social emotional learning and the queer theory and the gender theory and the critical race theory that they're using. Exactly. Not to derail our conversation, but I'm so pissed off that they literally recreated Maoism in our schools, literally. And totally tricked everybody.
What bothers me the most is when we have guests who come in here.
So if you listen to that, James Lindsay doesn't mince any words there. He's saying there's Maoism in the public schools going on right now. And I fully agree with him. In 2020, what do we see? We saw Maoism come out of the closet. It's in our public schools. Who brought it into our public schools? Probably, if I had to guess, President Obama would be instrumental in bringing CRT and the intersectionality stuff into our public schools. He's going to really get into it and give some good insights as well.
Who are like moderate or conservative or, understand what's going on. And they just like will block, like very like nonchalantly be like, yeah, my kid's going to college. And so we're trying to figure out where to send them to. And I'm like, why? No. Aren't you like savvy to what's going on politically? I saw this story on Reddit where a guy was like, I sent my daughter off to college and she came back and now she hates me. I don't understand what happened. And I'm like, maybe you should pay attention to your children and their lives. So you think you can send your kid to an institutionalized learning facility and they won't be indoctrinated? I'm sorry. You need to wake up and make sure you're paying attention to what your kids are doing.
I mean, that's even a problem when you don't have a Maoist structure in place.
Right.
And like, I don't know if you guys, I don't know if anybody knows, no American knows how freaking Maoism worked. It's actually very simple. Mao created a list of bad identities, right? That's it. They called them black identities. We'll get the critical race theorists to work on that later.
They'll call them white identities.
But it was, exactly. So but it was for fascism.
And this is the part that gets just so interesting right here that I want to really zero in. That the part that grabbed my attention with the identities that James Lindsay is going to talk about.
And so these were people that were like wealthy landowners, landlords, wealthy farmers, stuff like that.
So he's going to blame the wealthy farmers, wealthy landlords for the peasants' problems. Hey, it's all the wealthy people's fault.
Influence was one of them. And then he created these other identities, red for communism, that were good identities. And they were things like peasant and laborer, but then also revolutionary, activist, things like that. And so what you would do.
And so what we're seeing now in the country is, hey, these new revolutionaries, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, whatever, give it time. Revolutionaries will be seen that they're the anti-racist. They are the heroes. We're seeing this going on. The seeds are definitely planted. How fully grown is it? Has it just sprouted? Has it been growing for a year, 5 years? That's the question, really.
Do is you take kids into school and you're like, oh, your dad's a wealthy farmer, black identity. You're the biggest problem in the world. You're connected to the biggest problem in the world. Guess what? Join our movement, though, and you can have a red identity like all the other cool kids, and you get to wear a red hat or whatever the little prize is for the kids that are the good guys. What are you doing now? Well, you're white, so you're complicit in racism. You are a racist, but you can be an ally. You're black. You don't even know how the system works, so you're complicit in racism. But you can become politically black. You can become a black voice. You're a 12-year-old girl. You're confused. You have white skin. You're the worst kind of person. But did you know that if you transition and become a queer activist, you have a positive social identity now? That's exactly how Mao did it. That's exactly what they're doing in schools now.
We had a good super chat from someone. They said, I like how only white people can be racist and black people can't be racist, but Candace Owens is a white supremacist.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask real quick. Have you spoken to Lily Tang Williams?
Yeah, I met her the other day.
And, let's talk about Phil Vischer and his comment there with Vody Balcom. Well, Vody Balcom, his voice doesn't really matter because why? His voice parallels Candace Owens. And so even though he's a black voice, his black voice doesn't matter. Why? Because it's the wrong kind of black voice. The same thing would be true under Maoism.
Okay, great. I was going to say, I think you two would have a great conversation.
Oh, yeah, she's awesome.
She's
totally awesome.
One of the things that terrifies me about this being like Maoism back is one of the things Mao did was talk about rightists. He would say all the rightists.
Far right.
So when I hear the language of whenever even us are my friends and we're talking, when someone's like those on the left, I feel like Mao has already indoctrinated you, sir. If you're thinking in terms of left and right, Mao has indoctrinated you.
I don't think so because the terms left
Okay.
and right go back.
And the guy with the longer hair, he's a little bit more maybe liberal. I tend to disagree with him a lot, but I just thought I'd say that.
To the French Revolution.
And even that was like just a couple the side of the aisle they sat on. It wasn't a political ideology.
But it was. I mean, we named the political ideologies after the side
of the aisle they were sitting on, but the ideologies were completely irrelevant to the side of the aisles they sat on at the time. And it's a mistake to split people in half like this right now.
No, the revolutionary side.
Mao did it. He did it on purpose.
Yeah.
There are two parent factions, and we could
That's
call
what
it.
Mao wants you to think, bro.
No,
just
there literally are. It's
the
an
other
objective
those and
fact.
the other. I mean, you got to be.
It's objective.
No.
Well, Ian,
it is. So
I don't think so. I don't think so.
James, are there two parent factions in the culture war?
Yeah, there are. We could call them right and left, but they're the
we
people
call
who
it blue
think.
and red. We call it 1 and 2. We call it A and B. We
What
call
about
it A and C. We call it alpha.
Can we
and
call
omega.
them
Doesn't matter
them
which
and
one.
then the others? I mean, how
doesn't
how
matter.
bad do you want to divide these people right now?
It's not about wanting to do anything.
But
It's
Ian,
about objective reality.
Unity cannot come at the expense of truth. These people are saying things and doing things that are horrific, and we need to speak out against that and acknowledge that their goals are separate from ours.
The truth is also is through the vessel it's spoken. Your perspective on truth is different from.
So
No,
we talked about the Jon Stewart thing earlier, and I said I didn't know if I should name it that, but that's actually what Mao was doing. They had labeled rightists as people who were against the Glorious Revolution. So anybody who was against the Glorious Revolution was in this black category and was a rightist. And so the goal was to stain anybody who wanted to keep the existing society largely intact in its structure.
And we're seeing that today like on a small level, like if you want to keep the statues, if you want to keep the streets named after the slave owners and the statues after the slave owners and the Confederates, we're seeing it to a small degree, then you're stained, and Christian nationalists, give it some time, they'll be stained as well. Especially if they're the ones that don't support the revolution, basically. Now, Phil Vischer, he's not a Christian nationalist. You know why? Because he supports the revolution. That's a little interesting, but we'll keep going.
Somehow morally polluted. Well, morally polluted, too stupid to understand the need for the glorious revolution, or crazy. And then the goal was to turn the people into thinking that everybody who liked the existing society, maybe thinking it's imperfect, but that the general structure is pretty good and we should try to reform within it rather than have a revolution that gave Mao all the power. Those people are the problem. And everybody who wants to be on the right side of history, which is a Hegelian Marxian idea.
Yeah, it is.
Everybody who wants to be on the right side of history now has to be against those people. So the divide and conquer, the splitting, what you're saying is, Mao wanted to split people, yes, for his own power. And what Tim is saying is, it's just objective reality that somebody's splitting us into two different factions that have, but there are two parent factions also, because there are two very different structures for how society is to be organized that literally comes all the way back down to subject versus object. Do you think in terms of the subject, or do you think in terms of the objective?
Okay. And so listening to James Lindsay, he's incredibly bright, a brilliant guy. For those just tuning in, this is Timcast. Tim Pool is a news guy. He is on YouTube 5 nights a week, and he'll do about 2 hours, normally a little bit even over 2 hours, and he'll talk about what's going on in the world with the Ukraine, with Russia, with CRT right here. James Lindsay is one of the brightest voices speaking out against CRT, and so Tim Pool's against it as well, and they both see the light. They both see what's going on, and they're both against CRT and shining the light against it. And so I listened to this and found it extremely interesting what James Lindsay had to say here. Let's look at a few comments before we keep going. What is your belief in nationalism requires a revolution to bring it back to that? What is your belief in nationalism require a revolution to bring it back to that? I don't understand that question. I think just phones with their autocorrect and stuff. Maybe ask that again or rephrase it, I guess. We're in the middle of a revolution right now with Marxism. We just are. It's our youth are being indoctrinated with CRT. They're being brainwashed with Marxism. That's what is going on. And James Lindsay's talking about it in this video, and he sees what's going on. How long will we be going tonight? I plan on probably about till 9, about another 40 minutes. I don't have a lot to talk about, just responding to this video, and I'm not sure how long the segment even is, to be honest. So probably about till 9 is my plan, but that's flexible. Yay, new reactions and change of pace. Oh, let's see. Yeah, we're not doing a video on, that one guy, whatever his name is. Kind of forgot. Okay.
There's a bunch of ways it's been described: authoritarian versus libertarian.
Sure.
There's a great way that was described to me by Stephen Marsh, which is a multicultural democracy.
And by the way, if you want to jump on and talk about critical race theory, I'm going to put the link in the comments for anyone that wants to jump on and chat about it. That's really what this live stream is. It's going to talk about. I might talk about the kerfuffle with Phil Vischer, Vody Balcom a little bit too, and what was going on there with Twitter. Why are so many Christians being seduced by CRT? The evangelical church is just so weak and watered down. How could it not be seduced by CRT? I don't know. I mean, I guess historically, what is one way that the church apostatizes? Well, it's the social gospel and social justice. Well, CRT is just loaded with a different gospel and a different kind of justice. a social justice. So I think historically it makes perfect sense how many Christian denominations that have already compromised really on the authority of God, they're the ones being seduced by CRT, I would argue. But again, if anyone wants to jump on and chat about CRT, like be my guest. But I think this will be a good, insightful video.
Democracy and a constitutional republic both existing within the same borders, which I find really interesting as well. I don't think necessarily any one kind of gets it. My view of it is actually Judeo-Christian moral framework versus Marxist lack of moral framework, a moral framework lack thereof. So the way I see it is when you look at the Constitution, you look at the ideas of liberalism or liberty, classical liberalism, etc. A lot of it is rooted in just Christian moral framework.
I'm gonna start calling it
and
Abrahamic.
It's interesting because
It's not necessarily
a lot of what
though.
Marxism.
That's why.
A lot of what Marxism has done is just bastardized Christian principles. So I think it's interesting that you pointed out
Yeah,
this
they're
idea
inverted.
of the Hegelian notion of being on the right side of history, or that history has an end. I mean, when you consider it, that is a Christian idea in some sense that's been twisted into something else.
It's called
and
the eschaton.
the idea is, their eschaton is our political order prevails.
Well, I'll put it this way.
That's right.
So whether people in this country realize it or not, if even the atheists, their moral framework is rooted in Christianity.
Yeah.
Not 100%. It's not like they follow the Bible. It's just that a lot of the ideas they hold true to themselves, they don't realize what they're.
I mean, right now with the courts, the checks and balances, the executive, legislative, and judicial, well, that's framed on a Christian worldview. How so? You don't want a lot of power just condensed in one area. You don't want one person having absolute power. And so what do? You water it down. You have your judicial, legislative, and executive. Why? Because absolute power corrupts absolutely. And then beyond that, in America, our law is based on, to some extent, the Mosaic law. But with CRT, with Marxism, and it's so ironic because they're the ones saying that they hate partiality so much. Well, you just watch the fruit of Marxism. It is going to be filled with so much partiality, so much. It's not going to fix a racism problem. No, it's not going to bring unity and healing to any degree. No, we're not going to see that stuff. We cannot see that stuff. And beyond that, if you know what's going on in America, hey, to me, it seems like we're witnessing right now the destruction of the middle class, especially with the inflation that's going on. And more and more, it seems like, especially give it some time, food's going to cost a lot more. And you're going to be spending a lot more of your paycheck just to buy food. And a lot of your poorer people are already spending a lot of money, unless they're on food stamps, just to pay for food. Your middle class is spending a lot of money just to pay for food. But magnify that times a lot of stuff. Why? Because gas is going up, which drives the prices of almost everything up. Goods up, services have to go up, right? And so we're seeing right now, because America is falling to Marxism and socialism, we're seeing the destruction of the middle class, really at, I think, an alarming rate. And beyond that, we will see the enslavement of the middle class. It has to be that way because Marxism and communism and socialism enslaves the middle class.
Root of that is. So there is a traditional view in terms of what is right and what is wrong, which comes from Christianity. For the race Marxists, for the woke, for whatever this other group is, they don't have those moral frameworks.
They have an inverted one.
Yes.
In fact, it's
Well,
inverted.
actually, I think it's lack thereof. It's whatever suits their power.
Well, yes. They do have a vision though, which is that everything comes from when they achieve their utopia. And so the whole thing is actually a pretty vastly religious structure. And the reason is because, kind of tracking back to, say the 19th century, you have basically God versus society as kind of the two explanations of what's going on.
And James Lindsay will talk about it because he'll say that CRT is kind of the framework of it is almost Augustinian. And it's a twisting and a perversion of Augustinian theology. And hey, they even have their own heaven, not the Christian heaven. They have their own twisted heaven with their utopia of this equality thing that they determine what it is, which is pretty interesting. And again, works-based salvation. They have their martyrs, they have their theologians and their saints. If you know what I'm saying, they have original sin, which what would that be? That would be whiteness. If you're white, that's the original sin.
Going on, or God versus self. And God has ordained this moral order. This is the Judeo-Christian order that you're looking at. What Marx actually said is, no, this is his 1844, so-called Paris manuscript, or his economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844 from Paris. And he says, no, what we're going to do is we're going to abandon that. We are going to make man in himself independent of everything. Man is going to become the deity, but not any man. Only awakened man, a Gnostically awakened man, if we want to get really technical, only awakened man who has a correct consciousness. And that consciousness is a social consciousness, or in other words, a socialist consciousness. And so when man and society become co-continuous.
Or what we see now would be those doing the work of anti-racism or environmentalism, doing the approved work, the approved good things.
So that man is for society and society is making man so that they're the same. It's total socialism. Then you have actualized, this is the Hegelian part, you have actualized the deity. The deity comes in the form of society as man, as society, which is totally hard to get your head around because it's this dialectical bullshit. But what that stands to do is replace God. And so what that is their moral framework. Anything that brings that into existence is good. Anything that resists that is bad. So anything that gives them power is good. And as a matter of fact, I don't want to keep going, but if you go to the Marxist.org and you look up, they have an encyclopedia. It's awesome. I love it. I read it a lot. They tell you exactly what the hell they mean by all these crazy words they use. You look up the word for truth, and they straight up tell you. A lot of people think that truth means correspondence to what's actually happening in the objective world. But for Marxists, it's a social formation. And then they go on and say, well, the rationalists think that truth is in reason, and the empiricists think that it's in evidence, and the pragmatists think that it's in what works. But for Marxists, it's closest to the pragmatists, but it must wed theory and practice. So it is what brings Marxism into the world is true.
I think a big...
Okay, so truth is what gives the CRT folks the most power. That's mind-boggling, and it's going to help make sense. Yep.
Component of the culture war may be, do you believe in a greater power than yourself? That doesn't mean God. That doesn't mean you're religious. When I think about inalienable rights, why I believe in freedom, it's because
and that's why too we'll see an assault on the meaning of words. And Marxists and CRT folks, they're going to twist the meanings of words. They already do. We see it all the time to mean things that they've never meant before, like with racism, white supremacy, fill in the blank. It's never meant what they've said it to mean, but now it just magically does. But they have the media behind them, they have culture behind them, and they're doing it. I mean, you have to give them props because whatever they're doing, it's being effective.
Feel that I am a tiny, insignificant fragment of the universe relative to the greatness and vastness of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I do believe in God.
Yeah.
I'm not theistic, like following any particular religion. But so when I think about other people's lives and their rights and what they're entitled to, I think there's something beyond me. And, I respect other people's existence.
Yeah, that's totally it.
But for the woke, their view is there is nothing. The power is them if they're to take it. They can be gods. So you think about...
That's right.
You think about the World Economic Forum. You think about transhumanists. You think about the people who are like, can we transcend? And I recommend... I recently just played the video game for Horizon Forbidden West. Zero Dawn was awesome.
And Tim Pool, who's talking right now, he'll get in a lot of times he'll talk a lot about Bitcoin, not a lot about transhumanism, but he'll talk about issues that the mainstream media doesn't really talk about. And transhumanism hasn't really interested me in stuff, but he'll dive into conspiracy theories and into these different things. So just so you know.
Came out a while ago. Forbidden West is the new game that just came out. I'm not going to spoil it because it's really new. But if you like these conversations, play that game. I'm a little underwhelmed by the writing, but it plays in a bit to this, and it's really fascinating concepts outside of the kind of weak story they made. But concepts about transhumanism and things like this are really, really fascinating because these people think they're gods.
Well, that's right. Because Marx actually, the belief is that the subject and the object, and this is why it does dichotomize, as people that center the subject versus people that center the object. Marx believed that these two are in dialectical relationship. He also took this from Hegel, who believed that the deity will actualize when the subject and object are synthesized. This was the Hegelian systematic philosophy. So Marx took it from there, and he actually, the goal for Marxists is that you are a subject. You can envision, I want to create the blade. I see the blade in my mind. I know what Maul's sword should look like. And then I go get a piece of apparently brass and bang on it with a hammer, and hopefully don't give myself zinc poisoning when I put it in the fire.
Don't rag on my anime.
I'm just saying,
he's a blacksmith.
I'm just saying, don't put brass in a forge without proper ventilation. Just don't do it. So then you create the thing with your hammer, right? Your sickle is for when you're hungry, and you create the thing. And so in the object, you see that you created that which was in your subjective vision. And so you recognize yourself as creator. You recognize yourself as somebody who has the capacity to shape the world. And then when you see this, not only can you shape.
And that seems a little bit postmodern too, I would think. But you can see how Marxism, the CRT movement, it is religious to an extent. And James Lindsay is he's really bright. He knows a lot of philosophy.
Maul sword, not only can you shape wakizashi, not only can you shape Zelda sword or whiskey G or whatever it happens to be. Whiskey G is the Chinese for whiskey, by the way. I know all the people are gonna be like, it's Baijiu. No, whiskey G is a thing they actually say when they talk about like American whiskey. I know that because my Chinese person, every time I drink, he doesn't speak English, and every time I drink whiskey, he's like, whiskey G. He gets really excited. And so anyway, the goal is that you also have to shape man and society as your objects. So you have to create socialist consciousness in man, including yourself, but everybody else as well. And then you also have to shape society to become a socialist society so that when those two fuse, you now have the perfected society. This is literally the religion, and I mean religion in the fundamental correct term of Marxism. And this is the operating system behind the entire thing. And race Marxism or critical race theory is the same thing. You're just doing it now on the racial justice.
All three of us have our hands.
Yeah. And he calls it racism Marxism or race Marxism. That's what we have going on today. And that's why when we see Christians defending components of Marxism, like Phil Vischer, it should raise alarm bells, is what I'm saying. And Christians that support racism, Marxism, race Marxism, whatever you want to call it there. I love the term cultural Marxism because that makes sense, or adult Marxism because, hey, it's Marxism. What we're seeing right now is Marxism, just all grown up. I say it all the time. Why? Because under Marxism, no one's an individual ever again. Just get rid of that notion. You are not an individual. You're broken down into a group. The media is really good at this today. Why? Because when they talk about people, it is never as an individual. It is always as a group. That's why they're always talking about men and women, men versus women, blacks versus whites, and the rich versus the poor, and these kind of things. But again, you're broken down into groups, and each group is either an oppressor or the oppressed. And we know the oppressed groups. I mean, I intersect with a lot of them. I'm a man. Am I rich? I guess I'm middle class, probably, right? But a straight man would be an oppressor, and a white straight man would be a major, major oppressor. A white straight Christian man would be an insane oppressor. But we see that in our media today, basically, with racism, race Marxism.
I want to say real quick, talking about the Maul sword, that Maul sword.
He has to defend it.
There was a point in time where that would have been the pinnacle of weapons technology. And it's like it costs like $15.
A brass blade.
The brass is fake.
I think that's probably just like aluminum garbage or something. But the point is the way it's shaped and like it's easy for us to make something like that. Some ancient tribe would have been like, wow.
Yeah.
Is that like to bind the blade, that little hook, that little at the bottom there? If it catches the blade to bind it?
I mean, I guess probably.
It's Ian. It's like
it's a mall sword.
It's a mall sword.
It's there to look at.
$15 piece of metal that's like, a toy.
I love that you referenced the fact that this is very clearly a religion, and one of the Christian principles that's sort of been bastardized here is this idea of like cooperating with God in creation. But where the huge distinction here is Marxists see human beings as objects, as you described, which can be reformed in their own image. So in that way, they really start to play God.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because Tim sort of mentioned that we have this Christian framework that a lot of people don't realize they're following. And I would also argue our culture has a Marxist framework. And on top of that, you mentioned the Marxist framework, but I think there are a lot of people, including in the conservative movement, who don't realize they're following the Marxist framework as well. And in many cases, even more closely than they are the Christian framework. So there are a lot of Marxist assumptions that our culture currently takes for granted. One example would be that without any qualification, equality is always an inherent good. But of course, that's ridiculous, right? We should not treat a pedophile the way we would treat a law-abiding citizen. In some instances, you need an equality, and justice is more important.
We shouldn't treat the guy who runs way faster than the other guy equally when it comes to handing out medals either.
Exactly, exactly. There is a necessity for people to be treated unequally in certain circumstances. I would argue another way in which we've assumed Marxist thinking or taking it for granted is that we can solve problems, including moral problems, with a more equitable distribution of resources. So what the Marxists said for so long was that if we just more equitably distribute resources and workers own the means of production, all of these social ills will fall away. And then instead of saying that's absolutely nonsense because there's more human beings than the materials they're made of and they need something deeper, the conservative...
Well, I mean, historically what we see though is, and I might go look up this Bible verse that Make It Real is talking about, but historically, under Marxism, socialism, we see the destruction of the middle class, but then you have your upper class who are insanely rich, and there is a tremendous amount of corruption that goes on. And beyond that, if you don't own your stuff, productivity is not very good, to say the least. I'll go look up the Bible verse, Proverbs 18:21, and see what is being referenced there.
Movement today responds by saying, no. Yes, of course, resource distribution is the most important thing, but those resources are distributed better by capitalism as opposed to Marxism.
You know what I really can't stand is when politicians call out God and they like name God when you can tell they don't truly believe it.
Like Joe Biden.
Yeah, and it just really, really shreds me on the inside.
Grinds my gears.
We got to go to Super Chats. If you haven't already, nuke that like button, subscribe to the channel. Share the show with your friends if you really like it. Become a member at timcast.com if you'd like to help support our work and keep all of our journalists and employees in this show going. And you'll also get access to...
So from there, I'm going to guess that they move on and kind of close the show from there. But there were some good thoughts on critical race theory. Race Marxism is probably what I might start referring it to as race Marxism. Normally, when you think of Marxism, it is the rich versus the poor, economic Marxism, basically. But that's not what has captured Phil Vischer's heart. Phil Vischer's heart is about race Marxism now. Let's see. But the challenge becomes for us to subdue and establish dominion over that which we called into existence, Proverbs 8:21, and fabricated as our reality. Oh, let me look there. Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Oh, let's go. Whoever I am, let's read a chunk of that actually, just so I have a little bit more flow. An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before the great. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. That's a pretty famous proverb right there. The lot puts an end to quarrels and decides between powerful contenders. A brother offended is more unyielding than a strong city, and quarreling is like the bars of a castle. From the fruit of a man's mouth, his stomach is satisfied. He is satisfied by the yield of his lips. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. I'd have to go and study that some more. That's not what Proverbs 18:21 is talking about. The declaration and gospel is to speak life, and James explains the counter application. So we could go into more of the Bible and talk about the power of the tongue. Rex. There we go. Racism. How would you pronounce that? That is a good point. There's a difference between lived experience truths apart from truths by which you lived. The latter informs the former, but in the former, we surmise the veracity of the latter. I'll be honest. I think my brain is pretty much mush. It is here in Montana. It's 8:42. It's probably later wherever you're at. But my brain is like mashed potatoes right now. What does this sentence mean? My brain is it's on off mode. It's on it's on 20% capacity right now, to be honest. But the other thing I thought I'd mention about it, I should probably do an entirely separate video on this. Would be on the SBC and racism. I like that. That's good. But I think we should call it race Marxism, or economic Marxism. It'd be race Marxism, yeah. Or not ethnic, yeah, race Marxism. I like that. But earlier, I don't know if it's today, probably yesterday. Phil Vischer was taking some shots at Vodi Balcom. There was a report, an article, I guess, saying that some Christians, some people in the SBC wanted Vodi Balcom to run for president of the SBC. Why? Ed Litton will not seek re-election. He's stepping down. And so now we saw the liberal candidate kind of come forward, and he's gaining momentum, gaining his supporters. I can't remember his name. If you remember his name, drop it down in the comments. But I don't know that conservatives have rallied behind a guy yet. I don't know if they're going to rally behind Mike Stone. I really have no clue what is going on there. Vodi is apparently too Christian to be black because Vischer logic. I guess so. I mean, Phil Vischer took a shot at Vodi Balcom, saying, maybe someone in the comments, perhaps was saying, hey, that would be great. And Phil Vischer was saying that you don't want, essentially, these are my words, not his, but he was essentially saying, hey, Vodi Balcom doesn't really speak for black people or black Christians, to be more specific. Just in the same way that Candace Owens doesn't really speak for black African Americans, that, if you will. In other words, under Marxism, which Phil Vischer is influenced by Marxism, let's get that straight. Well, you're not the correct black voice. Vodi Balcom, Candace Owens, you're not the correct, black voice who is ushering in the Marxist propaganda. Well, your voice doesn't matter. Your voice doesn't count. That's essentially what is going on here, for people that know what's going on here. And so Phil Vischer, he's got a podcast. It's the Holy Post podcast, I believe is what it's called. And on it, it's saturated with CRT. It's saturated with what James Lindsay from this video was talking about. And Phil Vischer is pretty far down the woke path. If you want someone to declare the authority of God's word, Phil Vischer is not your guy. But if you want someone to talk about race Marxism, Phil Vischer, give him a call, because he probably is your guy. Just to be straight and up forward with it and what is going on there. I lost my plane. So that was the big comment that kind of fried my brain. And we're about ready to call it a night, so I can go recharge it, see if that works, right? Vody is apparently, yep, read that earlier. And hey, if anyone wants to jump on and, say, hey, Mark, you got this all wrong. The CRT stuff, it's amazing. You should try it sometime. Jump on and tell me how amazing it is. And hey, everyone, I'm late as always. Well, we're basically bringing this to an end. I don't have anything else to say. I don't think. Let me look. Not really. Nick, if Nick is still on, Nicholas, I made a video on Tony Evans, and I was wondering if you guys thought I was a little too harsh on Tony Evans. I see that David Platt is preaching alongside Tony Evans, or speaking alongside him. I think this weekend or next weekend. And I had some folks respond and comment on my video with Alan Parr, saying Tony Evans is one of his top 5 favorite preachers. And to me, that's just an alarm and a major warning sign, a major red flag. But then someone started talking about the things that Tony Evans has done. There's some good video clips of him preaching the exclusivity of Jesus Christ. And then there's other clips of him teaching transdispensationalism and ignoring original sin. And so, that makes me kind of think, scratch my head. Should we call Tony Evans a false teacher, a leading people into heresy? That would be an option. Should we do that? Well, a lot of people, I think, would say, no, we shouldn't do that. And we should treat him as a brother, but a brother who's in serious, serious error. I'm undecided, to be honest. But when someone believes in transdispensationalism, there is an assault on the 5 solas. There has to be. And I think it's going to bleed into other areas of theology. But again, there's not as much error and as much concern as, say, a Marcus Rogers or other false teachers, as Steve Furtick. Steve Furtick and people listening to Steve Furtick would be radically more alarming to me than Tony Evans. But maybe it's more dangerous when you can just kind of blend in and stuff. But so again, let me just say, I would not recommend Tony Evans as a preacher and everything. But maybe I was too hard on him. I don't know. I want to hear feedback on that. Reform Wiki 2.0 didn't classify him as a false teacher. It classified him as someone, hey, the warning bell should be on. You really have to be on high alert with him, but we're not going to declare him a false teacher. So let me know thoughts on that. Maybe people watch this in the future. Let me know your thoughts on that. That would be, it's a live stream, Nicholas, and it won't have Tony. It's Alan Parr. It has his thumbnail in it. What's the title of it? Alan Parr. What is it? It's an Alan Parr thumbnail. And I only have maybe 6 or 7 live streams, so it should be pretty easy to find, I think. But it's from about a week ago too. So, in facts. So with that, no one wants to jump on today, which is a shame. That's my favorite thing to do on live streams. But yeah, this went 15 minutes, so pretty short live stream. Didn't think it'd be that long. I'll have to trim out the beginning because my audio got messed up. But with that, hey, hit the like button on the way out, and I will see you in the next live stream.